I only use 3 or 4 different hair brushes, and they're not all that difficult to create. You can find a lot of prefab brushes online, but I would discourage you from doing that. You're going to find more use out of brushes that you create yourself, because it means having to learn the brush engine. This is the brush engine right here. Right now I've just got the standard hard round brush selected. Now when I create a brush, I'll usually have 2 canvases open. One will be for the brush itself, and the other will be for testing it, which you may have to do a lot of to get the right brush. I already know which brushes I'm going to create here, so I'll just take you through it and show you which parts of the brush engine I end up using rather than go through the entire engine line by line. Because the truth of the matter is, I don't use a lot of this stuff right here. My brushes are very simple. And the main brush that I use is still that 24 pixel brush right here. That's my go-to paintbrush. But when it comes to hair, I do need to create a few more. Over time, I've tweaked these brushes to get the best result, and while you're free to use the ones I'm going to show you here, I'd recommend you make your own. It's the best way to figure out how things work, and it will enable you to make better brushes that suit your own style and techniques in the future. So here goes. We'll close the brush palette, and we're going to create a new document. Just going to create it 3 inches by 3 inches, or a resolution of 300, and a color mode of grayscale. Something to know about brushes, you can only create them in black and white. Black, white, shades of gray in between. It won't save any of the other data. So click OK. I like to create a new layer. I don't bother naming it, I just don't like working on the background. Then I'm going to create another new document with the same dimensions, same resolution, same color mode. I'm going to put them side by side. This little icon right here. And I'm going to zoom out on this one. This is going to be to design my brush. This is going to be to test my brush. So I'm going to grab a standard hard round brush, go into my brushes palette, bring the spacing down so this is a little more smooth than it was. I'm going to paint in black, but I have my pressure sensitivity on so it's not going to be completely opaque. And I'm just going to create 3 dots. Try not to make them uniform. Nature doesn't usually have perfect spheres. And you might be asking, well, how do I know where to put the dots? Simple answer, experience. You spend some time in the brush engine, you're going to figure out what's going to happen when you try to create these dots. What I'm thinking of is I want to fill this space, because Photoshop is going to read this entire square to define the brush. And I think I might make this one just a little bit bigger. I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur to it. Not too much, just enough so there aren't really any hard edges to it. And that's our hairbrush. Looks a little weird, I know. We'll go to the layers. I'm going to right click, flatten it. And change the image size because brushes should be saved at 72 pixels per inch. And I'm going to change the width to about 125. Again, it's an arbitrary number. Just by experience, I know that a brush is going to work well at a lower size. See, because when you're ready to test the brush, you have to capture it. And this is why we're shrinking it down to 72. And you don't want your brushes to be too big or too complicated because both of these things are going to make your brush less responsive. And when you're painting, you don't want to have to wait for Photoshop to catch up. I've always found that those really detailed, noisy, textured brushes you can find in different places online, they're a waste of time for painting because they're so difficult to work with. Now they have their other uses, but for painting, keep to the simple stuff. We're going to select all, edit, define brush preset. Don't worry about naming it right now because we're going to have to rename it again after we change a few things. But if we go into our brushes, there's our little triple dot hairbrush. Deselect and move over to our testing canvas. Open up the brush palette, and this is our hairbrush. Well, it doesn't quite look the right way, so all we have to do is bring the spacing down. And that looks pretty good. Looks more like a hairbrush. Transfer is already on, and I've got the control set to pen pressure. I don't have anything done on this slider bar. That's the only thing I do here is set that to pen pressure. Bring it up to brush tip shape, and we're ready to go. Close the brush palette. Change the size with the wheel on the Wacom pen, or the wheel on the Wacom tablet. And let's test out our hairbrush. Do some sampling of different shades around it. And that's a pretty decent hairbrush. Go back into the brush palette. You can change the sizing. You can try different things. For example, I'm going to go to Shape Dynamics. and I don't like how it tapers there. But if I take off pen pressure, yeah, it doesn't really do much, so I'm going to take that off. If you go to angle jitter and switch it to direction, it makes it too uniform. So that's something you want to avoid too. You can change the angle of the brush, so you can change basically where these strands are going to go. But if you design the brush right, you shouldn't have a problem. You can also change you can squeeze it. Let's see what that does. Not a very good brush to use. It might have its uses, but this one right here is going to be the best thing. So as you can see, it was just a simple thing of transfer with pen pressure and bringing the spacing down. Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're designing brushes is they forget to save them. So you go back into your brush palette, click this little button down here. Now you can name it, even though a lot of the times you won't even see the name. I'm just going to call it triple dot brush. Now here's the problem. It wants you to capture the brush size in the preset, and right now you're set at 30. So we have to cancel this. Because if we save it at 30, it's going to be too small to be of any use at large size. So go to our size, manually change it. We're going to go back to 125. Double check everything here. Yeah, everything looks good. And now we're going to try saving it again. Now it's going to capture the brush size in the preset, 125. Call it triple dot brush. Click OK. Go back in our brushes, and now we have 2 of them. Well, this is going to save. The last one we saved is right here. That's the one with all the changes to it. So we want to delete this. Right-click and delete the brush. Now it's still not saved in the presets. So you go up here to this arrow, and you want to save brushes. Now I've got a brush set. This brush set is called Photoshop Cafe Paint. I'm going to click on it, save. It'll ask if I want to replace it. Say OK. Now this brush is saved as part of this set. These are 2 very important steps. Save your brushes, because I've seen a lot of people, they'll go in and they'll say, well, wait a minute, I did all this stuff in the brush engine, why isn't it there? It's because you forgot to save the brush. Let's create another brush. I'm going to select all on here and clear it. I'm just going to go back in the history to the open document. Make sure you create a new layer for testing. Select black, go back to the hard round brush. Bring the spacing down. Now we're going to create a multi-dot brush. Same principle as before. The only difference is vary the sizes a fair bit more. And create multiple brushes around the design area. They don't have to be uniform. In fact, it's better if they're not. Alright, let's see what that'll do. So we're going to go to Layers, flatten it, change the image size. Again, 125, it's just a number I like. Select all, define your brush. Don't bother naming it yet. Deselect, make sure you have it selected. Go over to your testing and open up the brush palette. Well, that doesn't look like any kind of hairbrush, again, but here's another thing you can do. Let's go into Shape Dynamics. We're going to change the angle. See what's happening down here? All of a sudden our uniform dots are looking more like random dots. Make sure your transfer the pen pressure is on. Go back to your brush tip. You can change your spacing. Now this is a good one where spacing it out actually works really well, or you can space it down to 1%. I'm going to do it right here, and we'll see what that does for us. Go into testing. We've got a nice little texture brush. Now this works great for things like the dog's nose. You wouldn't want to do it at full opacity or anything, but if it looks too smooth, which sometimes this happens, this will break it up on another layer set at low opacity. It'll break it up so somebody looking at it isn't going to think, well, it's done with an airbrush or a computer did it. This is going to make it look a lot more natural, and if you use different colors and different blend modes, this texture brush is going to add a lot more realism. So we're going to keep that. Go back into the brushes palette. Let's put our size again at 125. We're going to save this as our texture brush. Go in here, delete the first one, and save our brushes. Now this one is part of that set. But you might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought we were dealing with hairbrushes. Well, we are. And without doing anything else but changing these parameters, we're going to turn this into a hairbrush. We'll turn off shape dynamics so it's uniform again, and bring the spacing down. Now it's a multi-hair brush instead of just the triple dot brush. Same settings as before. And you have yourself a great wide hairbrush. Everybody thinks these brushes need to be really, really complicated, and they don't. And I know because this is a really simple brush, when I want to use this at high resolution, I'm not going to be waiting for Photoshop. I'm just going to be thinking about painting. I'm not going to be thinking that I'm working on a computer. I'm not going to be thinking that I'm working with a tablet. I'm just going to be thinking about painting. And there's our hairbrush. So we're going to save this one again. We'll call this the multi-dot hairbrush. And here's something. Both of these brushes look the same. Well, that's because this one's our texture brush, this one's our hairbrush, and all we did was change things in the brush preset. Make sure we save our brushes again. It's not like you have to do this, create brushes every time you create a new painting. You're just going to create this and you'll get used to having your brush set, the brushes that you go to when you want to do a painting. I haven't created new brushes for my paintings in quite a while because I spent a lot of time creating them in the first place. I just know which ones I need. And if I find that something's not giving me the results I want, then I'll go back and think, okay, what if I create a new brush? Is this going to give me better results? So you can change these around. You can change the order. If you go into the preset manager, you can just drop and drag. Put that one before the triple dot, and you know that this is my texture, and then my hairbrushes start here. That's one way of doing it. Or you just get to the point where you know if you only have 5 different brushes that you use while you're painting, you'll know which one is your texture brush in that. And the quick way to find out, see in here, this is your texture, this is your hairbrush. Very easy. Now I'd like to show you one more brush that isn't based on dots, but it does have the same principles. I'm going to clear all this in our tester. We're going to bring this back to creating a new brush design, and we're going to start with our soft round brush yet again. Bring the spacing right down. Got this button selected, or the opacity. I rarely ever work at 100%. I would recommend you never do if you want your paintings to look natural. Now I'm just going to create a line. You might think, wow, he's got a jittery hand. This is intentional, I assure you. And I'm going to go over it, give it a little bit of dimension, changing the size as I do it. I'm going to go into liquefy, and I've just realized I might have made a mistake. I didn't create a new layer. So we're going to clear that. And we're going to start again. Now you might think, well, why didn't he just re-record that section? Because I want to show you that you still make mistakes. And that's fine. They're very easy to correct, especially when you're making brushes. Now I'll go into liquefy. Just going to give it some tweaks. And I'm going to duplicate this one. Duplicate it again. I'm just hitting Control-J to copy onto the next layer. Take this layer 2, move it up. Take this layer, move it down. And we've got these 3 very uniform looking brushes. I'm going to merge them all together. Or these lines, pardon me. It's going to be a brush. Let's try warping it. And you might think, well, gee, that still looks really, really uniform. And you're right, it does. So we're going to bring the liquefy again. Just looking to break it up. Just adjust it like that so it's not straight. And let's see what happens with that. I'm going to flatten it. Change the image size. This one I'm going to leave at 200. I just happen to know that this brush performs well at a higher size, a larger size. Select all, edit, define brush preset. I'm just going to leave it at that. Deselect, go into our testing canvas, our brush engine, and just realized I haven't got it set on the brush. There we are. And this is what we have. Well, it kind of looks like a hairbrush, but not quite what we want. Transfers right with pen pressure. Let's try something in shape dynamics. That's because of the angle jitter. We're going to bring that right down. We're going to see what happens if we have it follow a direction. Well, it's a little too uniform there too, so we're going to turn that off. And actually, we don't need anything in shape dynamics, but let's try scattering. How about if we scatter it on both axes? Just a little tiny bit, and we'll bring the count up. Bring the scatter down, and the count up. Bring that there, spacing down. Let's see what happens here. Well, that doesn't look right at all. Well, what did we do wrong? It's because you have to go into shape dynamics and go with direction. Now we have a brush. Well, this is really broken up. That's a problem. So we go into the brush, brush tip shape, bring the spacing right down. You see we're experiencing a little tiny bit of lag. This is one of those cases where, you know what, this brush really is not working. So what did we do wrong? Well, I'm going to delete this layer. And I'm going to go back to our original brush design. Go into the history right before we flattened it. So now it's still got the separate layer. I'm going to take my airbrush with an eraser. And I'm going to erase these ends so they're really nice and smooth. I'm going to do that in a couple of little places too. We're going to make this look a little more natural. And we are going to see what happens if we make this a little straighter. Now that we have that, let's redefine our brush. Layers, flatten, change our image size again. Keep it at 200. Select all, edit, define brush preset. Make sure we're on the second one. We can delete this right now if you want. Delete that brush so we don't get any confusion. Let's try testing this again. That looks a little bit better. Let's see what happens if we paint with it now. Well, it's not going in the direction we wanted to. Because we defined a new brush, we have to reestablish all the parameters. So we go to Shape Dynamics. Angle Jitter is at direction now because we had it defaulted before. So that's going to do that. Go to Brush Tip Shape, maybe change the angle. Just a little tiny bit. Just so it breaks it up a little bit. Bring the spacing right down. And we'll see what happens now. Now we're starting to get a decent looking hairbrush. Still some more we can do with that. What if we brought it down to this? Now this would be a case where if you want to do single strands, I'm going to zoom right in. A little thinner than the triple dot, which would give you a little more finesse when you're painting certain areas. And you can bring that right down to create single strands of hair. It's better than a hard round brush because it still has some variation in it. And it's a lot more precise than, say, the triple dot brush. Now I could probably spend another good 10 minutes in here tweaking this brush, going back and forth to the design, and seeing if I can make it better, but this is going to do just fine for our purposes, so I'm not going to. Again, this is why I would encourage you to spend some time in the brush engine. Figure out what it can do. Sometimes just pressing one little thing, pressing one of these little parameters here, will offer you a whole new option that you hadn't even considered. Yeah, that's good. That'll have some potential. Save our brush. Make sure your size. That's something I often forget to do, and I have to go back and do it. So we've got the size at 200. Capture brush size and preset 199 is fine. I'm not worried about it. We'll just call this triple line brush. Click OK. Delete that one. Now we have 4 new brushes that we've created. We've got our texture brush. We'll just close this off and we'll look at each one of them real quick. We have our texture brush. We have our triple dot brush. We have our multi-line brush, which, as you know, is the same as our texture brush. And finally, our triple line brush. So while they're all based on the same principles, you can see how they all look a little bit different from each other. I mean, obviously the texture brush looks a lot different, but the hair brushes, they all look the same, so they'll look like they belong together in a painting, but they look a little different, which gives you more options when you're doing the painting itself. So that's it for hair brushes.